Welcome to another edition of the TechSoup Connect Canada chapter. It's put on by the digital nonprofit, a group of volunteers who come together once or twice a month to host a free workshop to help nonprofits figure out how do they navigate the world of technology. I'm Eli, and with us here also in the chat is Trisha, who has just joined. So let's talk about today's expert. So today we are going to be talking about tools and strategies for nurturing your nonprofit's key relationships, i.e., relationships, important, also a lot of work. Are there ways we could build some systems to make this more sustainable for our organizations and also more consistent? So around that, we're really excited to bring in a repeat presenter, which is Raaj Chatterjee from Meaningful. So Raj is an award-winning social entrepreneur and the co-founder of Meaningful, which is an AI-powered CRM built for nonprofits and associations. He's got this technical background in engineering, but Raj uses that to bridge technology and social impact to help organizations strengthen relationships and scale their community reach. He's a nonprofit board member, a TEDx speaker, and a recipient of multiple national awards. But that's all just background for the fact that he's passionate about creating technology that enables social-driven change. You're going to learn all about the work Raj does, and so I'm going to pass over the baton. Ladies and gentlemen, use those hand-clapping emojis to welcome Raj.
Amazing. Thanks, Eli. Very excited to present today, and thank you for the applause. Yeah, so I know that you're coming from a very diverse audience today, different organizations, maybe different roles. So I've prepared this presentation in a way that's quite general, and hopefully you can take something away from it. At the risk of it being perhaps a bit too general, please feel free to ask those specific questions relevant to your project at the end. So really excited today to talk about strengthening connections through technology. We were thinking of how to summarize what this presentation is about, and that's really the core of what I'm going to be talking about today. And the longer name is Tools and Strategies to Nurture Your Nonprofit's Key Relationships. So I'll start off with a brief intro about myself, about our team. We'll dive into strategies. We'll discuss some tools to make those strategies into reality, and talk a bit about more resources as well as some case studies of projects we were able to get off the ground. So a bit about us. My name is Raj. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Meaningful, and I want to recognize my colleague, Maddie, who's also on the call today, for creating this presentation together with me. And a bit about Meaningful is that we are a purpose-driven software company building a CRM designs for associations and nonprofits. And our goal is really to help freeing teams from this chaos of disjointed tools and administration so that they can focus on engagement, value, and outcomes. And since it was just Halloween, I've included a cute monster to help us out throughout this presentation. All right, so talk a bit about some of the learning outcomes for today is really being able to craft a key relationship strategy, choosing the tools to execute that strategy, and sharing some case studies for inspiration that you can hopefully perhaps adapt to your own use case. All right, so let's talk about key relationships for nonprofits. And a key relationship is also called a stakeholder, but it's really someone who is interested or concerned in the success of your organization or project. So these could be donors, these could be funders, sponsors, members, volunteers, board members, staff, and many more. So key relationships are really the fuel to what keeps our organizations running along and growing and achieving the impact that we want to achieve. As Eli mentioned earlier, it's really hard to keep track of all of these different key relationships. And oftentimes the tools that are available to us from a business perspective might not be able to capture this complexity of the nonprofit's key relationships. So today we're going to dissect that and hopefully come up with some strategies and some tools to help you actually better understand your key relationships and actually advance those key relationships, grow and retain those important connections for your organization. So starting with part one is strategy. So like Eli mentioned earlier, it's about building better nonprofits, and that really starts with strategy. And we can choose the tools that complement our strategy. And I've this is the way that we think about it here at Meaningful in terms of a few different pillars to build up that strategy. The first is information. And information is really important because it keeps your team on the same page. So as an individual, maybe you do have a small team and you're responsible entirely for an entire key relationship segment. In that case, you might be storing a lot of stuff in your head. But what if you onboard someone onto your team or you are working with a big team? That's when information storage becomes extremely important, as well as the way that you organize that information. The second is communication. So that's really the meat of the key relationship is how do you communicate with the people that are driving your organization forwards. And what's important when it comes to communications is setting up systems and being able to engage with the right time and with the right message. And finally, automation. So automation is something that is really important in today's world because we have so many tools to explore automation. But because we have so many tools, it's also really challenging to choose the right one and also do it right in the sense that you're not diluting the value of that relationship and you're instead just enhancing it and allowing you to actually grow those relationships. So these are the pillars that we'll go over, and we'll continue with these pillars throughout the whole presentation. So let's start off with information. Information pertains to any data that you might want to collect about that key relationship. So what kind of information is this? It's really creating a comprehensive record of each contact in your organization. These could include meeting notes and email history from conversations, so we're all on the same page. And information should be easily accessible by the entire team that needs to know about this relationship. How it helps is to help that whole team collaborate on that same data. It also enables segmentation. So that's a really powerful way to enable personalized communication to each individual key relationship and even within those relationship segments. And you can also track stages and journeys of your key relationships. For example, starting off as a volunteer applicant all the way to becoming a volunteer to potentially becoming a board member. And being able to track those stages gives you that whole entire view of that key relationship. And this is an example of a contact record in a CRM or customer relationship management software. And it could include things like a first name and a last name, an email, an organization name, which could be your organization, or maybe they're part of a different organization that you're collaborating with. It's nice to have a phone number, having a status of where they're at or what kind of relationship they are. Have they participated in an event, their address, and past emails and meeting notes. So these are the essentials. And you can go a lot more with this kind of contacts and store notes. You can store who they're assigned to within your organization as a lead contact. And it's just important to have this as a standard across your organization that you're able to actually collaborate with others and actually design this information structure because that's where the power is. And just to talk about segmentation is that now that you have this information record, you can start segmenting over any of these fields and you can create custom segments for all the donors that donated last year or anyone who just signed up as a potential board member candidate. So this contact record is actually the bedrock of a lot of the work that you'll be doing with enhancing key relationships. So next is communication, and it's really the bedrock of the key relationship. So it's about building trust and really making sure that those key relationships are aligned with your nonprofit mission. And I'll talk about a few segments of communication. The first is communication for engaged relationships. So these are people that you're already working with, you have a great relationship with, and you want to make sure that continues. These could be donors, these could be staff, members, could be program participants. And you want to make sure that there's that one-to-one touch so that there's a human talking to a human. The other type of communication is one-to-many, and that's really useful to be able to broadcast that out to all of the existing people within a key relationship segment, but also nurture relationships that are not yet at that engaged stage. So it could be a really great way for you to collect potential donors or potential candidates for a board member posting. And really, it's about making sure that those people who are not yet super engaged have the tools and the next steps to continue on that relationship journey. How this really helps when you have communication system set up is you can tailor the level of effort to the importance of that relationship with your immediate mission. And also allows you to leverage that information structure that you've created to actually communicate these updates very often and making sure that people are never in the dark about what you're working on. So I'll talk about channels here, and then later we'll talk about tools for communication. But one-on-one channels include LinkedIn, individual emails, and mail merge. So mail merge is a technique that you can send an individual email to every person, but it's slightly customized to what they are looking for. There's Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp direct messages that people still use, individual SMS messaging, and phone calls. One-to-many communications include segmented emails, newsletters, event information, group texts, marketing blasts, and social media posts. And finally, let's talk about automations as a third pillar of a key relationship strategy. And these could be manually triggered, automatically triggered, or AI enabled. And how it helps is really to help to scale your key relationship building. It's easy to perhaps engage with 20 people one-to-one, but the key advantage of using automations is it allows you to reach more people, but also make sure that you take care of those tasks that need to be done immediately. So right after there's a donation made, you want to make sure there's a thank you ready to go. You want to make sure that receipt is ready for that donor. You want to make sure that there's an opportunity for them to share that donation with their social networks. Automations helps with not just the scale, but also the timing of the relationship building. And I'll talk a bit about building out automations, and feel free to throw any questions in the chat if you have any questions of what we talked about so far. But I'll talk a bit about those three categories of automations because I think it's really important to understand how we can actually build these automations in a way that makes sense and is not too complicated. So building out automations typically has three steps. The first is the sequence, then there's the trigger, and then now new to us is the AI-enabled automations. So sequence is really about mapping out that user journey or the flow that you want the recipient to go through. Triggers is about responding to those stakeholder actions. So when does this automation start? And AI enabled is about enabling some level of personalization that AI or large language models can help with using your information to personalize that automation. And this is really there for optimization. So we'll give you a quick example of a sequence. This is a volunteer sign up sequence. So really is getting from volunteers from sign up to participating in your organization with minimal effort. So the starting point is really when the volunteer signs up or is added to the system. We want to make sure they're sent some training materials. They're sent an email with their shift assignment. And finally, if they don't reply to confirm, there's actually a follow-up message. And this is an example of a sequence, but it can be adapted to any other relationship type as well. And these are tools that happen multiple times across different people. So it's nice to standardize these and load them up into your system so that you don't have to keep sending these one by one. We'll talk about triggers next. And it's really about capturing people's attentions while it's still fresh in their mind. So the simplest example of a trigger is when someone fills out a volunteer interest form and they are just enrolled into a follow-up email sequence. So you might not be accepting volunteers right away, but they're interested, then they'll at least be in that email sequence and they'll know when potential volunteer opportunities are coming out. A more complex trigger could be, like I mentioned, conditional. So you have a volunteer finish an event. If they follow up with a feedback form and they really love it, it will actually send them an email to recommend a friend to volunteer next time. And then if maybe they didn't highly rate it, you can schedule a follow-up call to see what went wrong. And there's also cross-department triggers. So let's say the communications department at your org makes a social media post. It could actually automatically send that to volunteers to engage as an email. And then that actually creates a boost to initial post traction. So the combinations with triggers and sequences are really endless. You can create an automation within an automation, and you can use these if-else statements to create really, really rich automations that can help you to grow and make sure you just never miss out on a potential opportunity to engage. I'll talk a bit about AI enabled because this is very new. But for example, you could have newsletter personalization where a volunteer signs up for a newsletter. AI can personalize that content based on where they live, what their skills are, what they're interested in. And then you can actually end up with higher engagement with relevant opportunities, especially if you're a national based organization and you don't want to have a separate newsletter for every single province or city. You could do light touch personalization in automated emails. So for example, if you're just sending the same exact content to every single person, you could have AI to add a bit of light personalization, saying things like, hey, thanks for signing up through this platform. And that could be something that's stored in their CRM data. And you could add that personalization in just to make that message more relevant to them. And finally, you could also really take AI to the next level and use AI to start predicting how to reach out to people and what time, and actually schedule like a follow-up meeting completely generated. And we'll take time to kind of discover best practices around these, but this is some of the tools that are definitely coming down the pipeline. So just to summarize the strategy, it's important to have information in mind. So creating that information system, how you want to segment your contacts. You want to talk about communication. What are the tools and the channels that we're using to communicate? And what are some of the branding, the messaging that's going into it? And finally, automation. How are we able to actually scale this impact and make sure people are engaged at the right time? All right. Thanks for sitting with me through strategy. We're going to talk a bit now about tools and implementing this into your actual organization. So I've split this out again into the same framework. We need tools to manage our information, tools to manage communication, and tools to manage automation. So let's talk a bit about information. And CRM, like Eli mentioned here in the question, is essentially just refers to customer relationship management. So any tools that are used to manage these key relationships. And they actually come up with a lot of pros and cons. So here's a few that you might recognize, and I'll talk a bit through the pros and cons of each of them and where they might be used. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. There's so many, and there's going to be new tools coming out that you'll want to be aware of. Some tools that we use internally at our Meaningful include Notion. So this is where we actually store a lot of information about existing projects that we're working on, things like content, things like newsletters and social media posts. We talk about actually pretty much a lot of our workspace is stored in Notion. And you can use Google Docs as well, but just a place to actually store some of that rich data. Google similarly has a really rich framework for Google Docs. You can have Google Sheets. There are free plans for nonprofits as well. Notion is a bit more on the pricier side, but there are ways to optimize your Notion. So you really just have one user and everyone else is a guest. Can talk about different frameworks for that. Slack also has a free option there and paid versions, but it's one way to actually just make sure everyone's on the same page. And Airtable is actually a really cool tool where you can build a full scale database, but it's a lot easier to work with. So yeah, all these plans typically all these companies typically do have some nonprofit plans like Eli mentioned. So please make sure you're optimizing your use of them for your costs and also for what you actually need. I want to talk about Clarify.ai because that's a really cool tool I've been using. And basically, it creates a branded AI note taker for you and allows you to also create deal pipelines. So if you have people in distinct stages, like donors, you might want to, large donors, you might want to start qualifying them, having that conversation, and then see if they made a donation. That's where a tool like Clarify can be super helpful. And it just comes into any of your meetings and takes notes for you. And then you can talk to those meeting notes and create follow-up emails. There's also tools like HubSpot, which does have a free CRM, and then they have paid plans on top of that, but that's a very comprehensive CRM solution. And then there's Keela, which works more so for donors. And you have a solution that can track donations and make sure that information is also in one place. We went through a lot of tools here, but the key point here is just to go back to your strategy, see if you're able to achieve most of what you want, and then choose a set of tools that corresponds to that. In terms of communication, here are some of our favorite tools. So Google or Outlook typically would have the ability to just reach out one-to-one. MailChimp is a newsletter and email marketing tool similar to Constant Contact. We know a lot of clients we work with use those tools, and those are easy ways to just get a newsletter out and do some basic segmentation. And for social media, there's tools like Hootsuite, which I believe is Vancouver-based, and Later, which is a free tool that we've used for scheduling out that social media calendar. And just another tip is that sometimes your content management systems like Squarespace and Wix would also include communication modules. So you can sometimes just do everything out of that website builder as well, perhaps for an additional cost. All right, let's talk about automation. And here are some of the favorite tools that we use for automation. Airtable, one of the things I love about Airtable is that it's a database, but you also have automations that you can build out within Airtable. So you could change the status of someone in your database, and then it will automatically send them an email or enroll them into a sequence. And you can build out those automations to wait a few days, send another email, and so on. So it's actually quite rich for um, at a very simple user interface level. Then you have Zapier, which is, I would say, a step up, and that allows you to maybe connect some of these apps together. So if you have someone sign up to your CRM, but you want to add them to your MailChimp, then you can set up a Zapier integration, which would enable that to happen and just make sure your data is all synced up. And it's a really powerful platform. There's a lot more you can do with it, but definitely ways that you can get started in a simple way. There's Customer IO, and this is something that we use internally at Meaningful. But this one requires a bit more of an upfront investment, but it is an end-to-end customer automation platform. So you can set up what are called transactional emails, where anytime they do an action anywhere on your website, you send basically a call to Customer IO, and it can actually send any type of sequence or email or SMS to your customers, in this case, your stakeholders and key relationships. And another really cool tool that we found is Retool. And that allows you to actually build resources and internal dashboards and workflows. So if you have a tool like Airtable, you can connect that as a resource into Retool, and then you can create custom dashboards that you can give to your admin staff. You can have all your volunteer data, maybe in a Google Sheet or in an Airtable, and then you can use Retool to turn that into essentially a working dashboard. And right now they have ability to actually help you build that dashboard with some AI tools that they've built in there. So yeah, a lot of these tools are quite complicated. They have some steep learning curves, but they are quite powerful in, especially if you're building out your own system from scratch. So I'll talk a bit about, we talked a bit about all the different types of the pillars, and here are some all-in-one tools that kind of bring all that together so you don't have to deal with so many different systems. So HubSpot is a great one for that purpose. I would say the cons are it's like a very steep user interface. Like the user interface takes a while to navigate, but you can get it set up in a way where you have it that CRM, you have email marketing, and you have workflow automations all in one piece of software. And yeah, thanks for sharing that link there, Buffer. It's really interesting to see all the great tools that are out there. Another one is Keela. It's a donor-focused CRM system. So you have the info storage, you have the communication and the automations. And what we've been working on at Meaningful is actually an all-in-one system for that CRM, for that email marketing, for automations, and not just for donors or volunteers, but actually all types of key relationships. And the way that we've built it out is actually looking at some of the great successes of all these softwares and bringing some of those pieces together so that you have not just like a very general tool, but a very specialized tool to help with donors, with volunteers, with membership, and all on top of this pretty powerful information storage system. So just wanted to let you know there's many ways to build out these kind of systems, and it's always cool to find out new tools. And there's definitely a lot of innovation happening in this space. I'll talk a bit about now applying these to real world scenarios. And the first one is about volunteering. The second one, we'll talk about membership. And the third one's about donations. Talk a bit about the Public Health Association of BC, a really awesome organization. They do a lot of great work in so many different areas. And one of their projects was the Rise Up program. And it's a federally funded youth volunteer program for food security initiatives. So getting youth really excited about food, farming, gardening, and actually growing food for our communities. And one of the goals and the challenges is really to deliver these volunteer experiences to 200 youth by 2026, automating sign up and reminders, impact reporting back to the government, actually managing 200 plus volunteers and 100 plus host organizations. So these are all really important key relationships that they want to maintain. So their strategy was actually to build out a custom platform to streamline all the volunteer engagement and reporting for their 8-person program management team, and to provide a portal for youth and host organizations to track hours and engage with each other. Some of the tools that they used, we had a chance to work with them quite closely, is that they used our Meaningful Work volunteer database, and they used a few of these tools that I mentioned, like Customer IO, to reach out to all of their volunteers at the right time and make sure they had all the resources they need. They use a tool called Retool that I mentioned to build out their admin panel, and a tool called Heartbeat, which is actually a course community platform. So you can have conversations on there. You can have a community set up as well, and you can have education and courses too. So that's a really important part of it. Yeah, something with the PHABC is that they have a lot of staff, and the challenge is really making sure that all the staff have access to the same data and know as much as they can about all of their stakeholders. So that's something that we were able to help them with, particularly around architecting that volunteer database and making sure all the fields were all prepared in a really nice way so that they can segment and talk to the different stakeholders. For the communication side, it was about one, making sure all the platform communications were automated all the way from matching to an opportunity, recording hours, taking those education courses, and reporting back to the government. And in terms of automations, a lot of that was supported by making sure that platform is able to be running all the time and they're able to always access that progress update. So moving on to a more member-based organization, and this is Ace Tech Leadership, and they are an organization that empowers startup CEOs to accelerate the path to their company success by connecting them with mentors, angel investors, and they do some really awesome programming here in BC. So one of the goals that they had was actually to grow membership and sponsorships and increase retention. And what they were working with is actually spreadsheets. So they had about 10 spreadsheets that they were working with for all this information. And it was really a pain to go from spreadsheet to spreadsheet, update the information and action on it. So our strategy with them was to migrate their spreadsheets to a CRM for better segmentation. So they had different CEOs and different roundtables, for example, and we wanted to make sure that they're actually getting value out of those roundtables and out of those facilitators. And also being able to let them know when those roundtables are happening and also create some post-event surveys and post-roundtable surveys. Another really important thing was looking at prospective members and prospective sponsors. So this really includes focusing on deals and tracking which stage people are in, and also being able to record those meeting notes so that we can actually send follow-ups really efficiently. And they're a really small team, so they need all those systems to really streamline things. So they use our Meaningful CRM. And in terms of email marketing, they used Constant Contact. And for their website, they used Squarespace. And we'll talk a bit about the Verna J. Kirkness Foundation. Perhaps Neil is here in the conversation there, but they're a really awesome foundation, and they're focused on increasing the number of Indigenous students graduating from STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in Canada. And they're an equity-focused education organization. So work with youth across many rural and remote communities and bringing them to universities to be able to experience 1 week. And oftentimes those youth will go on to enroll in those universities and be part of this great alumni network. So their goal was really to grow and streamline their donor communications. So they have some corporate donors, they have some longtime individual donors. They are trying to create some grassroots donor momentum as well. And they also wanted to keep track of their alumni and those academic relationships with those universities. So one of the challenges they have is just working with Salesforce, which is they're using the Salesforce free plan. And it was a bit complex. And oftentimes some of the staff, it's not easy to train staff in that system. So migrating, and we're in actually that process of migrating them to a simpler CRM where we can do a lot of that segmentation work and actually creating segmented donor communications and automating the receipting. So there's many ways to receipt. So things like receipting manual checks, receipting for online donations, receipting for monthly supporters, and just making sure all that is simple and able to automate was another key goal. And so the tools that they used for this system was Meaningful CRM, Meaningful Donations, and they used a WordPress site where they were able to embed some of those components into that WordPress website. Yeah, so a lot of migrations with BJKF. Some of those included going from Wild Apricot all the way to WordPress and Meaningful Donations. So a lot of work was done, and Neil does an awesome job in really having that vision for this tech-focused education foundation, working to also enhance equity in tech. So just some key insights and takeaways. I think it's really important to start small and listen. It's really important to weigh those costs and benefits before starting your automation or AI projects, and also seeking advice from organizations and colleagues and considering accessibility at the heart of these programs. And it's also extremely important to track those success metrics very closely. Some things to avoid. Let's say you put a lot of work into a certain automation or a program and you're really proud of it, but it's just not really working or it's not hitting those success metrics. It's okay to let things go. And it's something that we learned a bit of the hard way is that sometimes it's just about doing less so that you can do more in the ways that really matter for your organization. It's also possible to put your organization's brand at risk when you start working with some of these systems. So making sure that you have that testing, that quality assurance system, and just send out that test email to yourself and a few colleagues before blasting the entire donor base, for example. So these are some systems that you can also implement into your procedures to make that super, super doable. And also don't be afraid to experiment and also learn from early mistakes. Typically, your relationships are strong and they will forgive you. And so it's important to also just accept that grace that you have with your community. Just some closing thoughts on AI. I think there's a huge risk of unprecedented change. And I mentioned some of the ways that AI can impact nonprofit communications. And just being prepared for that future is quite challenging. And we know that more than half of nonprofits are actively using AI, but currently some current stats say that less than 20% have an official policy on that, although that might be changing. And there's also the way that they're trained, including on personally identifiable information about volunteers and beneficiaries, including those who have maybe are vulnerable populations. So it's really important to keep all this in mind as you're using some of these tools that now have AI generative into pretty much into all of these tools to make sure that there is a framework or a policy and that you're following for your organization to make sure that you avoid any risk to any of your key relationships. Thanks so much for listening through this presentation. I'll open it up for Q&A, but just letting you know, you can contact myself or Maddie for a free workflow consultation if you want to just look through what you have at your org and see if there could be any improvements, or if you want to just implement a new kind of initiative or building out some communications or information or automations. So thanks again for your time and just opening up the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, Raj. Really appreciate this. I think you've given us some good sense of what are some of the avenues we can explore around automation. What are some of the key tools? And I've got some real questions in here. I see a couple questions actually that have come from Becky. Becky, do you want to come off mic and
Yeah. See, one question is, what are marketing options that don't trigger spam, like for email blasts that would be other than MailChimp or some of those paid options? Are there any? And then a second question would be, are there sample AI policies around for nonprofits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are some tools like HubSpot where you can send those one-to-one messages and you can scale that up and it wouldn't go into that marketing folder. We've built out a tool to enable you to do that through Meaningful platform as well. And there are some extensions you can install into your Google to enable you to do that. So you can send messages that are coming from you, but they are maybe being sent to more than multiple people. But feel free to share if anyone has any other ways that you've been able to do that. But that can be a really powerful way to just get into people's inboxes for sure. In terms of the policies, I'm actually not the policy expert here, but we are working on developing some interesting policies at Shift the Odds, which is I'm a full member of, and specifically around the AI equity piece and making sure that we can preserve equity in that digital and STEM space in Canada. This is a very active floor for research, so I can try to follow up on that. But it looks like Stephen has posted a resource here from N10 as well.
fabulous? So I've got a couple other questions coming out here. So one of the questions is coming in from Alex, who says, how much time does it typically take to set up all these systems? Say, just hypothetically, you're a small nonprofit with a solo fundraiser or an ED who's doing all the fundraising. Like, what is the time investment people should think about when they start thinking about automations?
Yeah, this is a great question. So it really depends that's why the strategy and the scoping is super important, because you can make it as complex as you want, or it can be just hitting just the very simple, most high priority issues. In terms of setting up a system, there's a few steps to it. First is just auditing your data and making sure what you have right now is ready to go. And then typically, if you do it yourself, it can take a while. I would say just getting a basic automation up and running for something that you haven't really automated before, or creating a communication system can take upwards of a few weeks, like a minimum, I would say, just to make it all get to that final like production level. But if you do work with experts in the field, they can often cut down that time for you. So one example, we work with Neil at VJKF, and we have this challenge to get them from Salesforce to Meaningful in 24 hours. So there are ways to speed that up, but you do need to put a lot of thought into it before you're ready to do that.
Awesome. I've got another great leading question coming in from Alex, who really wanted you to sell us. So how different is Meaningful versus the other CRM platforms? What makes you unique and special?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what makes us different from other platforms? I would say if you compare us to, say, HubSpot, which is a very business-focused CRM, is that we really focus on that nonprofit use case. And the UI or the user interface is very simple, but also very powerful in terms of segmentation. So really, we use all the principles that we talked about today and embedded that into a software product. So it's very functional, and you can, for example, connect your Gmail inbox and manage all of your different potential leads for donors, for example. So there's just a lot of inbuilt customization for nonprofits that's already ready to go, and you don't have to hire an external consultant to build that out for you. So that's, I would say, what makes us different. And then just that flexibility to work with not just donors, but also volunteers, board members, members in general, and so on. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Awesome. So I've got another question here. So say you're just starting to think through this automation thing and you're ready to start your first one. Walk us through the process. Like, how do I identify what might be an appropriate first challenge? How do I start thinking through the steps of the automation? Am I whiteboarding out the steps in a process diagram? How do we go through and do the testing? Can you just walk us through that journey of the first simple automation?
Yeah. No, I love this question because those tools are extremely helpful with the whiteboarding. But I think start back to, again, the strategy and what we're trying to achieve. Oftentimes, those automations come out of pain points in your daily process. So if you're finding yourself or your team member is spending a lot of their day doing the same thing over and over again, that's okay. Great time to flag that. And then you can see what is the impact to that relative to your priorities. And that's how you get that initial idea. And then you want to see if that is automatable or not, right? Maybe there is like a huge human touch point to it where the automation might be more so an assistant to help the the team member to actually get all the data available to them so they can respond very efficiently, or could it be totally automated? So we want to classify where that falls on the automation spectrum.
Right.
And then it's actually those tools, like you mentioned, whiteboarding. There's a great tool called Figma, and they have a tool called FigJam. And FigJam is one of those tools where you can just drag and drop different process diagrams. I guess Microsoft had some project tools back in the day, but it's a modern version of that. And that's a great tool for just sharing these digital frameworks or blueprints for these automations. And you want to consider just the user journey or different edge cases that might happen where maybe they don't have the right data, or what happens if they respond a different way. So just identifying potential issues that could come up. And then it's just a matter of testing that with your team, making sure that the team is like, they'll probably, if you test it with 5 people, they'll probably catch a lot of the main issues with that automation right away. And then it's a matter of slowly rolling that out to your one, just making sure that the staff member who's leading it is actually happy, it's making their life better. And also, is it making the end user who's receiving those communications life better as well?
No, I think that's really helpful. As you say, like, start with the strategy and then think of what do you do all the time that drives you crazy? Start there. Awesome. Friends, throw all your other questions into the chat. This is starting to be, we're coming close to the wrap up for the event soon. Otherwise, I think to me, the big question here is around that automation balance of, I want to keep the human touch in here. I also want to get rid of the things that drive me crazy and drain my energy and will to live. Where are you finding some balances? Like, when you think about big picture, what are the things that you feel shouldn't be automated because actually they're core to your work and the relationships you want to build?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, going back to that automation spectrum is I think that a lot of things I would say can often have some degree of automation without it feeling automated. And one example I'd like to give for that is writing a follow-up email to have. One way, like traditionally, is like we would take down notes, and I still take down notes from emails and do those like really precise things. But if you have a meeting where you're going through 20 different items, and I recently had that this week, and I need to keep track of all of those items and at the same time be really present in the conversation, that's really what we end up doing is using this Clarify note taker, and we've actually built that into our Meaningful app now, so that you can have your own branded note taker, and it actually keeps track of all these different threads and conversations. And you can just ask it, "Hey, can you pull out all the product related conversations that we had?" And it will actually pull out some of those product related conversations, and then it's up to you to kind of create the messaging, make sure nothing's missing or inaccurate, and compare it with your own notes. The way I'd answer that question is, I think technically anything can have some degree of automation, but it's just the amount that you want to put in versus the amount that you want to control. And that's
That,
really it.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, some of my work has often been that way, which is it's going to start from the templates. Like, if I bring in the template into the email, but also I'm always doing a final doing the quick customization for that particular person. And so I'm putting my time there on the stuff that's really important, like making sure that I'm bringing the context I have from that relationship into that message I'm about to send. But at the end, I'm the one who hit the send. I never had it go end to end fully automated.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did an interesting study with the University of Victoria on this, and we were looking at how different levels of context are provided to the AI. So just context meaning documents or information could actually help reduce that amount of time you spend revising those emails from it. So that was a really interesting study that's ongoing actually, and learning about what that balance is. And one of the core importance of having that information structure is that you can actually create that context for those AI systems that you'll set up in the future.
Amazing. Then let us come to a wrap. I want to say thank you so much, Raj.